I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with the cattle market summary for the week ending June the 5th, where these cattle futures have just been kind of trading in a narrow range here for the last couple of weeks, up one day and down the next, but not really doing a whole lot, but sure not tightening up on these June live cattle futures, which are still trading about more than $6 discount to what cash is. And we're in June right now, and you'd think this thing ought to be tightening up, but you know, the way this cattle futures board works, it's really an insurance policy, and all these guys that are feeding cattle, you know, they sell the board for when they're going to have cattle ready to sell, kind of as an insurance policy. And in a perfect world, you would think the packers would come in there and buy cattle throughout the year there in the different contracts to kind of offset their risk. But in today's vertically integrated world, they can find other ways to offset their risk, and they're just not playing that board. And you'd think if they had some long positions there for June that they would start demanding those cattle pretty soon at that cheaper price, but they simply don't have those positions, and they're just not going to buy the board, because anytime you come in there and start buying up certain contracts of cattle, it's going to inflate that price, and they're sure not going to do that. So it's going to be interesting to see how this thing comes together in the next couple of weeks. But rest assured, by the time we get to the end of June, your live cattle futures and your cash will be the same, and it's probably going to be a mixture of the cash coming down, the board going up, but the one's not going to go all the way to meet the other one. They'll have to meet in the middle somewhere. But your cash feeder cattle were higher again this week. You know, we started out earlier in the week with big gains, but that wasn't really a good test, because most of those sales didn't have a sale, or had a real light sale on Monday and Tuesday because of Memorial Day last week. But your mid to late week sales come in, and they were just as high or higher than some of those early week sales. So they saw gains on top of the gains that they saw last week, and for the most part firmed to $5 higher on those feedlot replacement cattle. Not too much of a test on calves in most places, but really good demand for these yearling replacements. As we know, there's not going to be very many of them. It just doesn't take a whole lot of yearling feeder cattle to draw a crowd anymore. Any little old sale that's got a load or two is going to see some pretty big volume buyers come in there, and especially these farmer feeders. These farmer feeders are getting kind of anxious to start getting some cattle put together, because they know the availability is not going to be very big, and they're not usually in the mix to really start getting any cattle direct wise, so they're going to have to go to the sales and get them, and they're knowing that there's not going to be very many out there, and they're wanting to get some cattle put together to feed, because most of them's got lots of feed left in their bins from last year's crop. They've got a lot of distillers product availability there. Some of them signed contracts for a year last year when they started feeding cattle, and they're still bringing that stuff, and it's starting to stink, and they need to get rid of it. And then they've got another bin buster growing in the field, so they're going to walk a lot of that to town, and these guys are really coming in there and getting aggressive there. But you see a few of these sales coming in this time of year, and then they throw cattle together. If they know some guys have some cattle to sell, they'll try to pool them up on one week to where they can get some buyers in there, and then on the other weeks they really just kind of have a cow sale and not a whole lot of feeder cattle. But you know, had a big special in Ogallala this week, and they sold cattle really well. Kingsville Livestock Auction, a lot of you might not know where that's at, but it's south and east of Kansas City, but it's a West Central's foremost livestock auction, and really a big player. Sell a lot of cattle, well over 100,000 a year. They had a big run this week, had 7 straight loads of yearlings on top of their calves and mixed cattle there. Had 1 load of steers, weighed 823, brought 240.60. That's quite a price there. Another load weighed 987 at 206.10. That's way over $2,000 a head. And then some other sales even back east, where those guys have backgrounded some yearlings and put them together. Look on Cattle Market Central, you see Bluegrass South there in Stanford, Kentucky. They had a load of handy weight steers weighing 683. You could do a lot of different things with those cattle. Bring 259.75. But not many calves moving right now. Most of them are turned out on lush pastures. Most of them still with their mothers. And but some of these cow-calf guys are really getting worried about this hay production deal. Most of them have already would normally have 1 cutting of hay already put up this year, but this year they haven't even got into the field because it's been too wet. And seen a lot of guys try to get some hay cut, and they just barely got it down, and another big toad strangler come through and wash their their hay away, and the windrows, you just have to keep raking them, and then it's not very good kind of hay when you finally get it put up, and just soggy everywhere. This week the southern plains kind of dried up, or they didn't dry up, but it finally quit raining a little bit, but then it moved on up into the Midwest and in and around the Kansas City area, all up there in northern Kansas and southern Nebraska and into Iowa and places there. Northern Missouri just had big rains, you know, all around the Kansas City region, just had flash flooding there. I live about an hour north of Kansas City. We got 7 inches in about a day and a half, and it came hard. And now we're starting to see hoof rot, sore feet, and a lot of these cattle, especially in places where they're not normally used to seeing that wet kind of country, and they're just not really accustomed to it. But we'll see more and more problems with that. This week, box beef was down hard again. You know, these loins have really backed off since that Memorial Day buying quit, and we didn't see the clearance of the shelves during Memorial Day that we would have liked to seen. And now your choice boxes are down to $244.65. That's more than 20 bucks off of that all-time high they posted just a couple of weeks ago. Selects are $237.57. Slaughter is not very good. These packers are not really turning that up. They're doing some cleanup and some maintenance and stuff, and really slowing this chain speed down. This week's slaughter was a whopping 12% lower than the same week a year ago, which is really huge and not a good thing if we're wanting to keep this fed cattle market up. This week's week to date was 550,000 compared to last week's holiday was 525,000, just 25,000 difference, and didn't have anything at all a week ago Monday. But and a year ago 616,000. But no fat trade so far this week. Just couldn't come together on a price. Packers are trying to work things down, and you know, they may do something late night Friday, or I would doubt, but maybe over the weekend, but really no trade to speak of at all, and during the business hours. So we'll see what happens next week, but that pretty much wraps up your cattle market summary. Check out DV Auction for weekly auctions and specials, and you can see this report on the StockExchangeNews.com. So we'll talk to you next week.